The blizzard rolled in like a curse, sweeping down from the Mogollon Rim with a fury that turned the desert pale and the pine forests white. Wind howled across the open range, bending fence posts and tearing at the shutters of an old ranch house that hadn't known a visitor in 3 winters. Inside, the fire cracked low, its warmth struggling against the creeping chill. Then came a sound that didn't belong to the wind hooves. Slow, deliberate, heavy as hammers on stone. Abel Cutter rose from his chair, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing. Through the frosted window pane he saw them. 10 riders. Tall, silent, draped in thick furs and buffalo hides, their hair braided with bone and feather. Apaches. They didn't dismount. Just sat their horses like sentinels staring at the cabin through the white curtain of snow. The one in front held someone. A small bundle limp in his arms. Abel stepped onto the porch boots, crunching the ice. He raised the rifle but didn't aim. "You're on Cutter land," he said. The lead rider looked down at the child in his arms, then back at Abel. "She's dying," he said. His voice was rough, broken by frost and desperation. Abel's trigger finger twitched. Every bone in his body told him to send them off. He hadn't spoken to another soul in months. Hadn't trusted one in years. But the way the snow clung to the girl's eyelashes, the way her breath came in shivers, it cut deeper than the cold. He stepped aside. "Bring her in." Only her. The Apache leader didn't move. "All of us," he said. Then one by one the riders dismounted. The storm swallowed them as they led their horses into the barn and their wounded into Abel's home, uninvited yet strangely expected. Abel Cutter lived in silence. 6 winters had passed since he last crossed a town's boundary, 6 summers since he'd spoken more than a few words strung together. His face was leathery and lean, carved with lines that told of hard sun and harder memories. A scar ran from the ridge of his right eye down through his cheek, a mark left by something with claws, or perhaps something worse. His hands were always shaking, but never when holding a rifle. The cabin he built with his wife Miriam still stood barely. A 1-room pine frame tucked under the shadow of the San Francisco Peaks fireplace, stone stacked by his own hands. The walls held no decoration save one horseshoe nailed over the door, and a faded photograph turned face down on the mantel. The only thing Abel touched every day was the silver locket hanging from a leather cord around his neck. He never opened it, never needed to. He knew what was inside. It was a wound, not a keepsake, something that had bled too long to scab. After Miriam died, birthing their daughter Elise, he'd stayed upright only for the girl. Raised her through rattlesnakes and rustlers, taught her to ride before she could write. But when she fell in love with a young Apache brave named Nanton, Abel's world split down the middle. He forbade it. She left anyway. Her last letter was short. "I forgive you, Papa. That was 9 years ago." He burned the envelope, kept the locket. Then came word from a drifter passing through that Elise had died, giving birth during a bad storm near Black Mesa. No mention of the child survived. Abel packed up, rode out alone, left everything behind but the scar and the silence. Now 10 Apache warriors sat cross-legged on his floor blankets, thawing the snow from their backs. Their leader, a tall man named Veko, placed the child, a girl maybe 6 or 7, on Abel's cot, brushing her hair back gently. Her lips were blue, feverish. She moaned but didn't wake. The others spoke little. They used hand signals, shared meat from leather pouches, and took turns boiling water for the girl. Abel stood back silent, watching it all with the twitch of a man who'd seen too many ambushes. But these men weren't raiders. They were fleeing something. His wolf dog Calico growled low whenever one passed, but Abel hushed him. On the second night, he stitched the girl's wound, a gash down her thigh, and cleaned it with old whiskey. Her hand flinched in his. She opened her eyes once, and though she didn't speak, he saw something familiar there. Not the shape of her nose or the cut of her jaw, but the same defiance Elise used to carry when she wanted to ride bareback, and he said no. He found himself checking her breath more often than necessary. When she whimpered in her sleep, he sat by her side until it passed. Veko watched him without speaking, arms crossed. On the 3rd morning, over black coffee and cornbread, Veko said, "She's stronger. You helped her." Abel didn't answer, just stared at the flames. Vecco added, "Her name is Tessa." Abel stirred the coals. "It doesn't matter." But his hand drifted to the locket as if on its own. Vecco saw, didn't speak, but something cold and heavy passed between them. Something that felt like a name waiting to be spoken aloud. A name buried under years of pride and sorrow. Abel stood up, walked out into the snow and didn't look back. By the fourth day, the snow hadn't let up. It buried the fence posts and turned the horse trough into a block of ice. The mountains were veiled in white and the trees groaned under the weight of it. Inside the cabin, the Apaches kept to themselves, moving like shadows, always alert, always listening. Abel tried to ignore them, but every creak of the floorboard, every quiet murmur in their language crawled under his skin. Yet it was the girl Tessa who pulled at something deeper. She was small, barely filling the cot. Her wound had scabbed, but fever still chased her, making her sweat through the borrowed furs. Abel had never been good with children, not even his own, but he found himself bringing her warm stones wrapped in cloth to place at her feet. He'd pour her sips of broth, whisper gruff encouragements she didn't answer. Sometimes when the fire flickered low and the wind moaned outside, he'd catch himself staring at her not for answers, but for something else. A memory, maybe? A ghost. On the fifth night, Tessa woke fully. She sat up slowly, blinking at the ceiling. Abel was carving a piece of mesquite near the hearth. She didn't speak right away. Then, soft as the fall of snow, she said, "Where's Mama?" Abel didn't flinch, didn't speak. His hands stopped carving. "Vecco said she'd meet us here," Tessa added, voice trembling. "He said this was the safe place." Abel didn't look at her, just stared into the fire. After a long silence, he said, "She ain't coming." The girl didn't cry. She just lay back down, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Abel stood, went to the cupboard, pulled down a faded blue shawl from the top shelf. He hadn't touched it in years. He draped it over her shoulders without a word. She clutched it like it was armor. The next morning, she followed him outside, didn't ask permission. Just walked out in the cold behind him in bare feet, the shawl wrapped tight. Abel didn't stop her. They fed the horses in silence. She asked questions sometimes. "What's that tool for? Why does the barn door squeak? How come Calico only listens to you?" Abel answered with shrugs or single words. But he noticed how she mimicked his gait, how she stood the same way, leaned on the same post. That night, while the others slept, Vecco approached him again. "She trusts you," he said. Abel shook his head. "She's just a kid. She doesn't know better. She knows what hearts feel like, even when they're covered in rust." Abel didn't answer, but the words stuck. The girl drew pictures in the soot of the fireplace stones. One night, Abel saw she'd drawn a cabin, a mountain, and 3 stick figures. One tall, one medium, one small. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't have to. The next morning, he found her by the fence line, staring at the horizon. "That way's Flagstaff," she said. Abel nodded. "Been there?" she asked. "Long time ago." "My mama liked mountains," she said. "She said we'd be safe in the mountains." Abel looked down the road, the one that hadn't seen tracks in years. Something tightened in his chest. "You will be," he said. He didn't mean to say it. It just came out, and Tessa smiled for the first time. The storm broke on the 6th day. Wind quieted. The sun cracked the sky like a cold egg, and the land blinked beneath a crust of glassy snow. The mountains gleamed like silver gods, and smoke curled peacefully from the chimney. It was the kind of morning that lied a calm before the cruel. Abel was chopping firewood out by the eastern wall when he heard it. Hoofbeats, fast, reckless, not like the Apaches' silent approach. These were heavy, angry. 3 riders crested the hill, black dusters, flapping rifles slung loose. The lead wore a wide-brimmed hat trimmed with silver, a long scar bisecting his lip, giving him a permanent sneer. The horses kicked up snow, steaming with sweat. They rode right up to the fence. Abel stood still, axe resting on his shoulder. He didn't wave, didn't move. The lead rider tipped his hat. "Well, I'll be damned." Abel cut her. "You still breathing?" Abel didn't answer. He knew the voice, knew the man. Marshal Judd Graves, once a bounty hunter, then a lawman, now something in between. They'd ridden together during the territory wars back when death was traded for whiskey and gold. Graves gestured to the house with his chin. Heard you had visitors? Big ones. Brown ones. Armed ones. Abel's grip tightened on the axe. They're not your concern, Graves laughed. Everything's my concern, old friend. Especially when they ride off with U.S. mailbags and kill 2 deputies out near Winslow. Abel stared. That true, Graves' eyes gleamed. Don't matter. Governor's got a reward out. 10 Apache warriors. One of 'em's supposed to be their leader. Scar on his jaw goes by Vecco. He leaned in. That name ring a bell. Abel didn't flinch. Never heard it. Graves spat into the snow. You always were a terrible liar. The second rider, younger, dark mustache, stiff with frost, spoke up. We saw smoke. Either you're baking a hell of a pie or someone's in there keeping warm. Graves pulled out a folded wanted poster. Threw it at Abel's boots. The ink bled, but the sketches were clear. 10 faces, Vecco among them. Now Graves said we can do this polite or we can make it look like the Alamo had a baby. Abel's voice was low. They got a child. Hurt. A little girl. Graves' face hardened. Don't care if they got Jesus himself in there. They stole from the government, killed officers. Harboring them makes you an accessory. You want to die for them. Abel looked past him down the long stretch of white toward the sunlit ridge where no law ever held. He could turn them in. Collect the bounty. Get a ride into town, trade for whiskey, and forget. Instead, he said, you ain't crossing that fence. The silence that followed was a kind of verdict. Graves chuckled, but it was humorless. You really gonna stand for them? Abel dropped the axe. I already am. Graves looked past him to the cabin. You always were a fool for causes that don't love you back. Then he turned his horse. You got till sundown. Then we're coming back. Not just 3 of us. Whole damn posse. Black spurs ride heavy. He grinned. I'll bring fire. They rode off, snow kicking up behind them like smoke. Inside, Abel relayed the conversation. Vecco said nothing at first. Then we'll leave. Abel shook his head. They'll catch you before the ridge. Snow's too deep. One of the other Apaches, an older man with a twisted leg, added, We fight here, we die. Abel looked at the girl asleep on the cot. She had begun to call him Grandpa, though she didn't know why. We fortify, he said. Set traps. Board windows. Vecco hesitated. Why help us? Abel didn't answer. That afternoon they moved like soldiers. They stacked logs against the doors, dug firing holes in the walls. Abel showed them where he kept the dynamite, a relic from his mining days. He and Vecco planted 2 charges in the barn just in case. By dusk, the wind picked up again. Calico paced the porch nose high. And on the horizon, the black spurs returned. 20 riders this time. Some carried torches. Abel loaded his Winchester, checked the shells. Looked to Vecco. You any good with that bow? Vecco grinned. Better than you are with that rifle. They waited in silence. And then the war came down the mountain. The black spurs came down the ridge like wolves on ice. Torches in hand, rifles raised. They whooped and hollered like it was a sport, like death was a contest they never lost. But Abel Cutter didn't run. He stood at the cabin window, eyes steady, Winchester cradled like a preacher holds his Bible. Beside him, Vecco notched an arrow and drew the bowstring back until it creaked. The first shot cracked like thunder. A torchbearer tumbled from his horse, disappearing beneath snow and hoof. The rest split into 2 flanks, rushing the house from both sides. From the tree line, arrows flew silent and true, punching through the snow-choked air. One rider dropped with a scream, clutching his side. Another's horse reared, impaled by a sharpened stake hidden under the fresh powder. The Apaches moved like ghosts. 2 to the roof, 1 to the barn. The others held tight inside with Abel. Tessa lay hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in quilts and shielded by a stack of feed sacks. Calico lay at her side, low growl constant. The first wave reached the porch. Gunfire exploded, wood shattered. Abel's shoulder slammed back from the rifle's kick. A man in a red scarf kicked down the door, shotgun raised, and caught an arrow through the neck before he could squeeze the trigger. He fell twitching. Smoke filled the cabin, splinters and firelight danced on the walls. Then the barn went up. A blast tore through the evening calm, sending fire and hay skyward in a fountain of roaring light. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Flames licked the sky and lit up the snow like hell beneath a lantern. Abel had triggered the fuse just like they planned. The second blast followed, weaker but enough to scatter the horses and throw 2 riders into the dirt. Graves wasn't among them. He stayed behind, watching from the hill, calculating like a butcher waiting to pick his cut. Inside the house, a bullet grazed Veko's arm. He grunted, tied it off, kept shooting. Abel took one through the side, not deep, but enough to make him stumble. He pressed cloth to the wound, teeth clenched, and kept firing. The Apaches covered each other, calling out in their tongue, precise and quick. This was their last stand. They fought like men who didn't expect to walk away. Then came the lull. Smoke thinned. Ammo ran low. The Black Spurs regrouped beyond the tree line. Judd Graves rode forward alone, hands raised. Abel stepped out onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. Graves looked around at the bodies, the blood melting the snow, the ruined barn blazing like a funeral pyre. "That's quite a defense," he said. "Lot of good men dead for the wrong cause." "They weren't good," Abel replied. "And the cause ain't yours to name." Graves nodded. "Maybe. But you know what I came for." Abel looked him in the eye. "No, I don't think you do." Graves cocked his head. "You still don't get it, do you? I know about Elise. Knew her real well. She used to write me after she left. She was scared. Said you'd come after her. Said you'd never accept." Abel stepped forward, face pale but burning. "Shut your mouth." Graves smirked. "That little girl inside, she's more Apache than anything else. You think raising her for a few days makes up for all you did?" Abel's voice was low. "I'm not trying to make up for anything." Graves shrugged. "Then die for it." The second wave came faster. 6 men stormed the front, firing from the hip. Abel shot 2 before falling back through the doorway. A bullet shattered the window next to his head. Veko launched an arrow into a rider's chest before he was tackled to the floor by one of the Black Spurs who made it through. Hand-to-hand chaos erupted. Boots on floorboards, blades drawn. A tomahawk split a man's skull. Another Apache took a bullet to the chest and collapsed wordlessly. Abel fought off a rider with a fire poker, blood soaking through his coat leg, wobbling. The girl screamed from below the boards, high and piercing. That sound tore something loose in Abel. He roared, grabbed the shotgun from above the mantel, and fired at point blank into the man pinning Veko. The blast threw the attacker back into the wall. Veko gasped, nodded, and scrambled to his feet. Together they drove out the last of the invaders from the cabin. Silence again. Then a voice cold and clear from outside. "Enough games." Graves had come down from the ridge. He stood alone now, pistol in one hand, torch in the other. He walked up slow, tossing the torch onto the porch. Flames climbed quickly. Inside, Abel turned to Veko. "Take the girl." "Out the back. Follow the creek bed. Stay low." Veko hesitated. "What about you?" Abel's face was stone. "I started this. I finish it." The back door swung open. Veko slipped out, carrying Tessa wrapped in quilts. Calico went with them, silent and watchful. Abel stood alone in the front room, surrounded by the dead and dying. Fire licked the walls. He limped to the door, shotgun in hand. Graves waited 10 paces away, pistol raised. "Last chance," Graves said. Abel's voice cracked. "I already had mine." They fired at the same time. The blast tore through the dusk. Graves stumbled, hit in the thigh, dropped to one knee. Abel dropped the shotgun, fell to the floor, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. Graves stood limp toward him, pistol aimed. Then a howl. Calico burst from the trees, sank his teeth into Graves's arm. The pistol fired wild. Abel reached for his knife. Too late. Graves shook Calico loose, raised the gun, and an arrow pierced his heart. Veko stood at the tree-lined bough, still drawn. Graves dropped wordlessly, eyes wide, body folding into the snow. The fire took the cabin by midnight. Veko buried Abel the next day under the cottonwood tree behind the barn. Tessa placed the locket, now open, on the stone marker. Inside, a faded photo of a young woman holding a baby. She didn't cry, just pressed her hand to the soil and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then she turned and walked away. The wind whispered over the ridge like a lullaby sung by the dead. The black spurs were gone, most buried in the snow, a few scattered back to wherever lawless men scurry when their teeth get knocked out. Veko stood silent over Abel's grave, the ash of the burned cabin still drifting into the trees behind him. His bow rested across his back. His face, usually still and sharp as chiseled stone, softened as he looked at the girl. Tessa was quiet, her small fingers running along the bark of the cottonwood. She clutched the silver locket, now keeping it pressed against her chest. When she turned to Veko, her eyes held the question she hadn't been ready to ask until now. Was he really my grandfather? Veko nodded slowly. Yes, his name was Abel Cutter. Your mother was Elise, my wife. The words sat in the air like heavy rain. Tessa stepped closer. But you said my father died. That you were my uncle. Veko's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted toward the ridgeline. We told you that because it was safer. Safer for you. Safer for us. He crouched before her. But the truth is this, I am Nantan. I took the name Veko after the war. To hide. But I was your father and I am your father still. Tessa's lips parted, but no sound came. Her breath caught. We ran, Nantan said, because the government wanted our land, our tribe, and your mother refused to leave me behind. We thought we'd start over, raise you free. But soldiers came. We were hunted. Elise, she gave her life for yours. Tessa stared at the locket, and Grandpa Nantan nodded, pain blooming behind his eyes. He couldn't forgive me, or himself, not until now. The snow fell again that night, soft and quiet. The fire had taken the house, but beneath the ash were the roots of something new. Tessa didn't speak again until morning. She walked the creek bed alone, trailing her fingers in the icy current. When she returned, she held something in her palm, a small rock, smooth and black, shaped like a heart. Can we stay here? She asked. Or do we have to run again? Nantan didn't answer right away. They'll keep hunting us. Graves was just one wolf in a pack. There'll be others. Tessa looked him in the eyes. Then let them come. That night they lit no fire, just sat under the stars, the burned husk of the ranch behind them. Nantan reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in buckskin, a photo, half burned but still visible. Elise smiling, holding a child wrapped in a blue shawl. I carried it all these years, he said. Afraid to show you. Afraid you'd ask why we couldn't go home. Tessa leaned against him. Maybe we just found it. They stayed through the winter. Spring came slowly. The snow melted, revealing the fence posts and the graves. Wildflowers grew where ash once clung. Nantan rebuilt the cabin smaller this time, using logs from fallen trees. Tessa helped her hands, blistering, her eyes focused. She fed Calico chopped wood, learned to fish. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she'd sit by the grave, locket in hand, whispering things only Abel could hear. One day a rider came. Not a bounty hunter, not a lawman. Just a traveler with dust in his beard and sorrow in his eyes. He brought no weapons, only a tin box full of old letters. Said they were from Elise, addressed to Abel, never delivered. The man had found them in a saddlebag in an abandoned mail station near Black Mesa. Nantan took the box without a word. That night he read the letters aloud to Tessa. Each one was full of longing, forgiveness, and love. Elise had never hated her father, only wished he could see the world she wanted to build. Tessa asked, why didn't he come for us? Nantan folded a letter. He didn't know where we were, and I think part of him couldn't face what he thought he destroyed. Tessa nodded. She understood. Pain was a slow-burning thing. Pride was a wall. But Abel Cutter had torn his down in the end. He had chosen fire not to destroy, but to protect, to redeem, and the girl he left behind would carry that fire forward. The last frost broke in early May. The peaks still wore their white caps, but the valley below came alive with green shoots and purple blossoms. The creek swelled with snowmelt, rushing louder each day as if it were speaking again after years of silence. Nantan stood at the edge of the cottonwood grove, his hands calloused, his shoulders heavier now. Behind him, the new cabin stood upright, smaller, sturdier, bearing none of the scars of the old. A single window faced east, catching the morning light, and a stone circle out back marked where the fire pit would go. They'd built it with their own hands, father and daughter, log by log, with no blueprints but memory. Tessa sat by the grave, a woven band of wildflowers draped across the wooden cross. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the night the old house burned, but her eyes glistened like the creek alive with the ache of everything unspoken. In her hand she held the locket, still warm from her skin. Nantan approached, placed a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it. "I'm going to carve something," she said softly. "What kind of something?" "Something he'd like." She rose, wiping her palms on her skirt, then pointed toward the old work table by the shed. "He carved things. I saw it, little animals. I want to make one." "Leave it here." Nantan nodded. "Then let's start." They spent the afternoon shaping wood in silence. A tiny horse, rough and unpolished but made with care. That evening they placed it at the foot of Abel's grave, next to a stone she had shaped into a heart. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the porch. Tessa stood barefoot in the grass, watching the breeze ripple through the flowers. She held the locket tight, then opened it one last time. Inside the photo, Elise smiling with baby Tessa cradled in her arms. Abel's handwriting was now visible on the inside lid. 4 words. "I'll find you someday." She closed it gently and walked inside. Nantan remained at the edge of the hill, watching as a hawk circled above, catching the last thermals before dusk. The land had grown quiet again, not with fear but with peace. They never knew if more riders would come. But they were ready now, not to run, to stay, to live. And in the snow just beyond the fire pit, one crimson flower bloomed, the only color in a field of white. It hadn't been planted. It had grown where Abel fell, where the fire burned hottest, where guilt died and something purer took root. Sometimes legends aren't born with thunder or made in blood. Sometimes they grow in silence, in the snow, in the hands of a girl who learned what it meant to forgive. If you felt something in your heart today, you might be one of us. For more stories like this one, subscribe and join us again next time, where the past never stays buried and justice wears many faces.